thank you very much to Gabriel for coming today to share with us. We're always excited that it's not just a bunch of hippies talking about that we've actually got really amazing experts from all sorts of different domains. And Gabriel is a patient turned industry specialist in the Australian medical cannabis space, and he trained in the wine industry. There's quite a few wine people that have moved over to cannabis. Yeah, where he, of course, developed a sharp sensory toolkit and applied it to the medical cannabis industry, and with a particular focus on quality, aroma, and subjective effects. So, bringing all that very expert knowledge, Gabriel has been working on creating a cannabis quality assessment framework. So, thank you for coming today and sharing that with us. Over to you.
Thank you so much for having me, everyone. Really, really lovely to be here. It's my second MardiGrass. I was here last year after a lifetime of wanting to come, and I was made to feel extremely welcome by everyone, all the locals and everything. So it was such an incredible experience, and I'm so happy to be back this year. So that was a lovely introduction. So yeah, essentially, my name's Gabby. I've been a medical cannabis patient for the past 4 or 5 years. Started off in the wine industry, learnt about blind tasting and judging wine, and then always wanted to become a cannabis critic, and slowly over time I was just applying that to cannabis. And then I started out doing reviews on Reddit of the flower I was getting, because I was like, wow, it's medical now, I can finally do reviews, wine reviews. And after maybe 2 years of that, I got noticed by one of the co-founders of EasyKind, which ended up becoming one of the largest medical cannabis clinics in Australia. And so I was working as in the product team there, basically selecting the flower, designing the formulary, which is like a list. It's like the wine list of products the doctors prescribe off. So we selected for quality and diversity and all of that, and I did that for 2 years at EasyKind, and as of about 3 weeks ago, I'm working at Soma House, which is a new holistic health clinic based out of Cairns. We're open now for telehealth consults if anyone needs some premium care. I've developed this framework for judging cannabis consistently, and I'm super excited to share that all with you today. This is basically my life's work, so I'm really feeling blessed to be on stage to talk about this. So that's that. I did just want to start with a quick intro that I'm not a medical professional, so this is purely to do with my understanding of cannabis as a patient and industry worker for the past couple of years. So I've covered my background. If you want to see my old reviews, I was under the name Citrus Quest on Reddit. Yeah, this presentation is mainly relevant for flower, but other inhaled dosage forms are in some way relevant as well. So why create a quality framework? Well, there's currently no systematic vocabulary for evaluating flower quality like there is for more established industries like wine, whiskey, beer, and coffee. And a quality framework allows for more consistent judging and appraisal when selecting flower for purchase or sale. So it provides this consistent vocabulary to communicate about cannabis traits, either between a grower and a supplier or a patient and their prescriber. And the system in wine is called BLIC, which I'll explain more about in a second. But I just wanted to provide some context before jumping into this. So a lot of what we know for sure about the way aroma relates to the user experience comes from a study, a relatively recent study in 2022 by Plum et al. Titled "The Nose Knows: Aroma but Not THC Mediates the Subjective Effects of Smoked and Vaporized Cannabis Flower." So these researchers took data from an Oregon cannabis competition called the Cultivation Classic over a period of 2 years. They logged 3,000 consumption sessions across 278 commercially available cannabis varieties, with a panel of 276 volunteer judges. And the most striking finding was essentially that a pleasant smell predicted user enjoyment. So in other words, if you like the smell, you're more likely to enjoy the effects. And that, of course, extends into medical effects as well. And it's important for medical cannabis because if you don't enjoy the effects, then the odds of you continuing your treatment are pretty slim, and the odds of that treatment actually suiting you are pretty slim as well. So this is relevant, even though it's focusing on recreational use. So pleasant smell predicts user enjoyment. So the smell is the most important thing. What they found as well is that THC percentage, THC dose, and total terpene content did not correlate with user enjoyment. So essentially nothing that you can tell from a certificate of analysis, like lab results, nothing you can tell from a certificate of analysis can tell you whether or not that product is high quality. And in terms of quality, I'm talking about subjective quality. I'm not talking about, so there's objective quality, which is more to do with like testing standards. This is governed by TGO 93 in Australia, which has to do with, essentially the testing of active ingredients in cannabis, testing of contaminants, manufacturing and labeling processes, and GMP or good manufacturing processes as well. So basically cleanliness and consistency. I'm not talking about that because pretty much everything on the market, of course, is objectively, clean and sterile and adequately tested and all of that. I'm talking about subjective quality, which more has to do with oxidation and staleness, resin content, cure completeness, and more. So, like what we found here, there's nothing you can actually tell from a lab analysis that lets you know if it's high quality or if people are going to enjoy it. So it all comes down to aroma. So I've developed this framework for judging cannabis called the FLC framework, and this takes inspiration from the Blick framework that's used in the wine industry. So Blick in wine refers to the 4 pillars of quality, which are balance, length, intensity, and complexity. And these are just attributes that define how the wine interacts with the palate. And the same can be done for cannabis. So I've spent years obsessing over this, and I've come to the conclusion that cannabis has 3 main quality pillars. And these are freshness, loudness, and complexity. So how fresh it smells, how strong it smells, and how complex it smells. And together, these hallmarks of quality indicate a high degree of aroma preservation, thus leading to rich, vibrant, and full spectrum subjective effects. By subjective effects, I'm just referring to like how the user feels after they consume it. So the reason that high aroma quality correlates with more full spectrum subjective effects is because some, if not most, aroma compounds in cannabis cross the blood-brain barrier, which essentially means that they are good candidates for drugs. If it crosses the blood-brain barrier, the odds of them functioning as drugs in the body are quite high, and they're likely to alter our perception. Terpenes being the most relevant aroma compounds, they're very small, volatile, lipophilic molecules that easily cross the blood-brain barrier, and so it should be no surprise that aroma is so intrinsically linked with quality. But it's important to note that increased quality does not necessarily lead to increased liking. As we know from the Plum et al. Study, the most important thing is whether or not that individual user likes the aroma of that particular cannabis. So it's got nothing to do with the actual quality of the flower. In some sense, it's actually worse if it's really high quality and it's a strain you dislike, because then the effects you dislike are like that much more like intense and vibrant. So it's even worse. So yeah, the most important thing is whether or not you actually like the smell. But once we've ticked that box, we can move on to whether or not that flower is actually high quality or not. So I go into way more detail about this in an article I wrote for Adam Isaac Miller's The Insider's Extract, which you can find online, titled Cannabis Quality Assessment Framework. So, sorry, the slide's a little cropped, but essentially, the 3 pillars of quality, I'll go into some detail on each of them. So the first one is freshness. And this is basically a subjective indicator of how oxidized or stale the flower is. So freshness, in this sense, doesn't refer to how recently the flower was harvested, although it might seem that way. It's more of an indicator of how well it has been preserved through drying and curing. So a flower with very high freshness should smell perfectly intact, and not like it is oxidized or dried dried out at all. So you can think of the difference between freshly ground coffee and pre-ground coffee. So obviously one is stale and one is not, and fresh is always best, and you really do have to grind it right before you use it. So the second pillar of quality is loudness. And loudness basically refers to aroma intensity and carry, so how far that aroma travels, mainly to do with aroma intensity. So a flower with very high loudness should easily be smelled from across the room. It should strongly permeate through any non-airtight container, and it should singe your nose hairs from how pungent it is. If you remember back in the day, like those like cheesy, skunky strains that would just like you like double, triple bag it, like spray deodorant and put it in your school bag or whatever, I don't know, and your mum can still smell it from like across the house. What happened to that, man? What happened? Weed these days is so muted. Anyway, it should be loud, it should be fresh, and it should also be complex. So complexity is same in wine. Complexity is a gauge of how broad the chemical profile of the flower is and how well it has retained its volatiles since harvest. So basically, cannabis is just all about retaining the volatiles that were present in the plant as it grew, and basically air, time, UV light are all fighting against you, and the clock is running down basically as soon as that flower is finished curing, or even before it starts to dry, that flower is getting stale, and complexity just refers to how well it has clung on to those extremely delicate aroma compounds. So a flower with very high complexity should have endless layers of aroma that make it hard to describe. And the aroma should change into something else every time you go back to smell it. So that's complexity. That's the 3 pillars of quality. And so I'll get into what these 3 pillars of quality actually tell us. So the first thing is resin content. And resin content, of course, is the amount of resin in the plant, which is a complex mixture of cannabinoids, terpenes, and flavorants, which are non-terpene aroma compounds, which are newly discovered in cannabis as of a couple of years ago. And resin content basically leads to increased vapor production, subjective potency, and a higher likelihood of freshness and complexity. The second thing aroma quality tells us is about oxidation or staleness, like I mentioned with freshness. So staleness is only represented to a small degree in a certificate of analysis. So you can't tell if it's stale or not through a lab analysis. Basically, the only metrics in a lab analysis that tell you whether or not the flower is fresh is active form cannabinoids like THC and CBN, and maybe something like caryophyllene oxide, and maybe moisture content. But it's not really much of an indicator of how stale it is. So stale flower frequently tests within specification, pretty much all the time. I see it all the time. Most flower on the medical market is stale. And yeah, you can't tell from a lab analysis. So that's oxidation or staleness. The third thing aroma quality tells us is to do with cure completeness. And by cure completeness, I'm referring to a complete breakdown of chlorophyll in order to prepare that plant for inhalation. So chlorophyll is the green photosynthetic plant pigment that all plants have. Basically anything green in plants is chlorophyll. That helps it make energy from light. And essentially, when cannabis is harvested, there's around, say, 80% moisture. You then have to dry that out to below 15% moisture to prepare it for inhalation. So not only that, but you also have to break down the chlorophyll in that plant completely before it dries out fully. And the reason you have to do this is because an incomplete cure, where there's incomplete chlorophyll breakdown, results in green aromas of hay or cut grass. So if you've ever smelled hay or grass or like some miscellaneous like herbal smell in your cannabis, I'm sorry, it's faulted. It's wrong. There's something wrong with it. And basically you avoid this by drying it out for a really long time. And this process of chlorophyll breakdown is enzymatically driven. So it relies on enzymes that are present in the plants that are essentially alive, kind of, in that they require some degree of moisture in order to break down that chlorophyll. So once it drops below 15%, that's it, the flower's dead. You've missed your window in order to break down that chlorophyll entirely. So this is why you need a 2-week dry minimum, really long, slow dry, finishing around or slightly below 15% moisture, and then finishing that cure. And the curing process is essentially breaking down the remnants of that chlorophyll that remain. And so when it's ready, the flower should be fresh, loud, and complex with no hay or cut grass kind of aromas. Nothing that smells like that lettuce you forgot about in the fridge 2 weeks ago and feel really guilty about throwing out. So this aroma fault can lead to a harsh inhalation, headaches, and muted subjective effects. I could go into way more detail about why that is, but I don't have time, I'm sorry. But come and talk to me after if you'd like to discuss this some more. But this is really important, and I see this chlorophyll type aroma in at least a third of medical cannabis. It's like a plague. It's like, my catchphrase is basically just, it smells like chlorophyll, all the time. So anyway, that's what aroma quality tells us. So I'm going to walk you through my judging process for cannabis now. This might be heresy. This might be a little contentious, especially with maybe old school smokers that have been smoking for a long time. Essentially, freshness, loudness, and complexity are all judged on a scale of very low to very high plus. It's effectively a 10-point scale, as you can see on the right here, very low plus, low, low plus, and so on. When you're figuring out the aroma of your flower, when you're starting out, it helps to have a standard reference flower to compare it to. So you have one that's maybe like high freshness, loudness, complexity, and then you can maybe compare if you're unsure. It's also important to do your best to put aside personal aroma preferences when judging the flower. So this framework has got absolutely nothing to do with whether or not you enjoy that aroma. It's purely to do with whether or not it's fresh, loud, and complex, right? So personally, I dislike most strains on the modern market. Cookies, gelatos, Skittles, runts, honestly, just doesn't click with me. But does that mean it's poor quality? No, of course not. It's just, it doesn't suit me. So you got to put aside your aroma preferences when judging flower. Otherwise, I don't know, I'd say maybe 5 to 10% of flower I would actually rate as being high quality. So consumption as well is not a part of this quality framework. I'm sorry. I have a strong belief that consumption introduces bias towards strains that click with the reviewer, right? So I use cannabis primarily for appetite and depression. Most strains don't work like that for me. So what, am I going to rate all the flower that doesn't work for me as being poor quality? No, of course not. They just don't suit me. So got to put aside your own personal aroma preferences. If it smells like vomit, that's a good thing. Anyway, psychoactive potency is also unrelated to flower quality. And you can, this is obvious just from CBD flower, right? Like, is all CBD flower poor quality just because it doesn't get you high? Obviously not. So how strong it is doesn't matter. What specifically it feels like doesn't matter. Also, certain types of terpene profile behave differently on the palate when inhaled, and attributes like mouth staining, which some other judges overseas pay attention to. This mouth staining effect may simply occur less with certain terpene profiles, regardless of quality. Smokability is also just a separate consideration, although good aroma quality leads to better smokability. So aroma quality is essentially just a proxy for quality, and it can tell you whether or not it will smoke well. I have seen so many flowers that are just dead, muted, hay-like, chlorophyll aromas, nothing to them, no resin content, whatever. They burn like a dream, pure white ash, no marging or canoeing, all of that, just like perfect cure seemingly, but no, they're heavily faulted. So smokability, I don't pay any attention to, and I'd urge you to not consider it either. If it has a good aroma, according to this framework, it's going to smoke well, straight up. So I don't even consider smokability, and I will die on this hill. So that's that. So in terms of the judging process, starting off with aroma, what I try and do is smell the flower before I see it in order to minimize bias. Because if you see it first, then you're going to have some preconceived idea of what it might smell like. So the first thing I do is I get the sample, try not to see it, I smell it. I then note freshness, loudness, and complexity from very low to very high plus. Most flowers sort of around low plus to medium, honestly, through medical. It's all irradiated as well, which is a whole other conversation. I also then note any chlorophyll aroma, which is really important, being the main fault in cannabis, that hay, grass, straw, leafy green aroma. I then note any mold or mildew aroma, which is exceptionally rare in medical cannabis, maybe a little more common on the street. And then this is unrelated to quality, but it helps. I note the main aroma descriptors of the flower. This is mainly for my own notes and just for referring back to the flower and understanding the character of that strain. So the descriptors, and you can see the aroma wheel on the right here. This is a aroma wheel based on the aroma wheel that's used in wine, and this was devised based on a study that basically had a focus panel of individuals, and they basically asked these people, what does all of this weed smell like? And then they categorized all the different smells that people said, put it in an aroma wheel. Besides chlorophyll and mold aroma, it doesn't actually matter what it smells like. It has nothing to do with the quality. It's just the character of that particular strain. But I still make a note of these because it's important. It also relates to the effects of the flower and the terpene profile and so on. So after that, I like to take a guess of the terpene profile of the flower in order to train my nose. You can blind taste cannabis like you can with wine. It's hard at first, but you can get it pretty reliably. It's a really fun party trick. If you really pay attention to it, you can like walk down the street and like tell someone what they're smoking. Like, hey, you're smoking something with tangy in the lineage. And it's great, it blows people's minds, it's awesome. So that's fun to do as well. And then in doing so, I also like to take a guess at the expected effects in order to try and strengthen my connection between aroma and effect, because they're intrinsically linked because of what I mentioned before with aroma compounds crossing the blood-brain barrier. So aroma is related to effect, and you can kind of predict this somewhat in most cases if you've trained yourself. So that's aroma, that's what I do when I receive a sample. And in my line of work, I've probably seen most of the cannabis on the medical market, so hundreds and hundreds of different strains. Every day there's something new. And this is basically what I do every time I get a new sample. So that's aroma. I'll talk about appearance, color, and texture. So first thing I do after the aroma is done, I note color intensity, trichome density, and nug size on a scale of very low to very high plus. Trichome density should not be given a high weighting, as aroma, color, texture, and resin content are more important when it comes to quality. And Dr. Gianni Del Rosario Macridis, who's got a PhD in cannabis genetics and trichome science, helped me sort of devise the finer points of this, and he is in firm agreement that trichome density actually has very little to do with the quality. But still, it's an indicator that a lot of people pay attention to, so I've included it as some minor part of this framework. Note any yellow, brown, or white colors in the flower, which can signify faults, as well as desaturated pale colors, which can signify improper chlorophyll breakdown, right? So I've included 2 pictures here as a reference. I think probably most people would look at those and go, wow, that looks great, right? Wrong, it looks terrible. You can tell just from looking at it that it's going to smell like hay or grass. It's that desaturated kind of pale pastel color that basically happens when the flower dries out too quickly. So I have a suspicion that this flower was maybe dried in a week or so. And you can see it's desaturated and pale. Man, these buds will fool so many people online. They'll post this picture to Instagram or Reddit and go, wow, look at this flower I got, it's amazing. And all the comments are people going, wow, that looks dank as hell. I'm sorry, it's faulted. You can just tell from the color, and I wish more people would understand that. Both of these flowers, they look good, but yeah, they smell like hay, and they were terrible. Nobody liked them. I won't say what brand that was because I actually really respect that brand, but those were misses for sure. In any case, in terms of texture, the nug should bounce back like a sponge when squished. The nug should either be sticky or powdery or greasy, depending on the cultivar, but then it should never be dry or brittle. Right, I've seen people demonstrate the quality of their cannabis by grinding it. Look, you don't even need a grinder. It just crumbles to dust in your fingers. Breaks my heart, to be honest, because, yeah, it shouldn't do that. It needs to be full of resin, right, because that's cannabinoids, terpenes, flavorants, all of that coming together. So it needs to be, if not sticky, then at least powdery or greasy and, like, full of trichomes. Very importantly, this is probably the most important thing besides aroma for me, is that when you grind it up, the nug should behave like magic sand when ground, right? It should look alive, like it has a mind of its own, like it's a flubber or something. I've got a video, next slide. I'll show you in a sec, but The stems should break cleanly with an audible when broken, right? It should literally pop like that. If it cracks or if it snaps, something's gone wrong, okay? I mean, maybe in some cases it will still crack or snap just a little, but it should really be popping. This happens with a long, slow dry, complete chlorophyll breakdown and a perfect balance of moisture inside that flower. So how the moisture is like distributed inside the flower matters a lot as well. So it should look like magic sand, which I'll show you in a sec. And the nog should also, of course, be free from microseeds or mature seeds, excess stem, leaves, bugs, fibers, or other contaminants. And this happens all the time, even in medical cannabis, where it's like GMP manufactured, really rigorous, sterile environment, all of that. Like there's tiny fibers in pretty much every flower. But still, we should avoid it. Also, medical cannabis, pretty much everything has slightly gone hermy. Like there's just so many microseeds in medical cannabis that it's basically the default. But anyway, here's a video of, please load. That's all right. I was really hoping that would play automatically. Whoops. Anyway, you've probably seen this before if you've ever smoked some chronic. It sort of like falls apart like magic sand, like it's kind of clinging to itself. And yeah, like it's just so sticky. When it falls apart, it just like clings to itself. And that's a sign of really high quality and should be like that. It certainly should not flake like dried kitchen herbs. And yeah, it should look alive, like it has a mind of its own. So that's it pretty much. I've had to keep this really brief because obviously I could talk for hours and hours. And I will talk for hours and hours if you let me. If you want to find me afterwards and talk more about cannabis, quality, blind tasting, aroma, terpenes, all of that. If anyone here is a judge at the Cannabis Cup, please come and talk to me after. I've always wanted to judge the Cannabis Cup, although as I understand it, you do have to smoke the cannabis, which I strongly disagree with when it comes to quality, but that's fine. I'll inhale if I have to. So yeah, come and find me, please. And yeah, feel free to get in touch via email or LinkedIn. There's some references here, but not too many because this is pretty subjective presentation. But yeah, that's me and my FLC quality framework. Thank you so much for listening and for having me.
Thank you,
Appreciate it.
Gabriel.